Was Akhenaten Anunnaki? Now, that's a great question. You see, when you look into a lot of these ancient Egyptian texts, you discover a lot of stuff about these people, especially when you look in there and you look into the ancient texts. You begin to realize that after the Great Flood, kingship was handed down from the Sumerian kings list, which is located in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, England. I've been there in person and taken a picture of it myself. But after the Great Flood, they decided to hand kingship down to a liaison between them and the general population of humans. They were called pharaohs, aka kings. And to keep the bloodline established and to have that communication with a person that they felt that they could trust, that pharaoh would have to be half human and half Anunnaki, or what they call in Greek demigods. And so they would mate with a human woman or impregnate her through in vitro fertilization so that she would have their seed, and that person would be their offspring, and that would be the liaison that would rule over the humans and speak between them and these gods, which is exactly what Akhenaten was doing. He had to answer to Aten, aka Amun-Ra. That was who he answered to. And Amun-Ra told him, start going around and defacing all the gods all throughout Egypt and throughout the lands. And he sent his team, his military, to go out and start chipping away at every single face that existed. And the Egyptians started panicking. They said, this guy's erasing all of our history. So they ousted him. And that's how come he ended up getting kicked out of Egypt. But then they killed his son, King Tut, right? Pretty quickly after. But what's interesting is you look at his face, you look at his body. He didn't have the typical Egyptian look, right? He had a weird shaped body and his super elongated head. And all of his kids had these gigantic heads. Even his wife had a gigantic head. His mother was Queen Taye, and his father was Amenhotep III, right? And you look at their heads, also massive. So it's pretty interesting that this lineage had been established, and this is the lineage that was ruling over Egypt. These people with these super gigantic skulls with massive brains inside of them. Pretty interesting stuff. Is the Sumerian pantheon of angels, are they angels or interdimensional beings? Another great question. So a lot of people, and I do mean a lot of people, don't believe that the Anunnaki were actual physical beings in the flesh, right? In the third dimension. I beg to differ. And the reason why I beg to differ, the reason why I don't believe that they were interdimensional beings, I believe they were physical beings that put their pants on one leg at a time, just like we do, is because the account of them in the Sumerian tablets, in the Mahabharata, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Indian Vedas, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, in the biblical text, in the Torah, no matter where you go, you find the Anunnaki. And they are real flesh and blood people. And the reason why we know this is because there are drawings and etchings and carvings of what they look like. There are remnants of the structures that they designed to have built all over the world. They're called megalithic structures. And the most incredible one, of course, is the Great Pyramid at Giza. That's one of the most incredible ones because it has so much information stored inside that one structure. The Great Pyramid at Giza is a multifunctional stone computer. It also is an astronomical, keeper of space and time. It can tell you the distance from the Earth to the moon, the distance from the Earth to the sun, the circumference of the sun, the circumference of the moon, the speed of the Earth on its axis, the speed of the Earth around the sun, the speed of the sun around the galactic equator, and the speed of our galaxy around the local cluster can all be calculated from the stones inside the Great Pyramid at Giza. If you then take a look from the sky down on top of Giza, where you have the three pyramids, including the Great, of course, you then can make concentric circles going around, which create a diagram that connects to the local temples and pyramids there within the Giza Plateau. When you take a map from NASA of the interplanetary solar system, that's the sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, and you take that diagram and download it from the internet and overlay it scale it up, scale the image of Giza down and overlay it on Giza, it's a perfect match. You see where the planets are, their orbits, and you can even tell the astronomical units. In other words, the distance from planet or moon to planet right there within that diagram. A perfect match. Giza is a perfect match of the interplanetary solar system. Incredible. And so on top of it being a power generator and so many other things, it's a real incredible sight. But again, all this is done by high technology and advanced beings, in my personal opinion, that walked in the actual flesh. You see accounts of them in the Bible, having sex with women, having sex with men. You see them in accounts in the text from all over the world, going to battle, going to war. They put on military gear. They had weapons. They would go to battle with humans to go against other humans and so forth, and even against each other. Like in the Mahabharata, they would have these huge wars in the sky, and people would be looking up and watching these flying cities go to battle against each other. So in my personal opinion, it just doesn't sound interdimensional at all. Now, what is interdimensional according to an account in ancient texts would be from the Nag Hammadi scripts, where they talk about two specific beings. One that kind of almost looks like a reptilian being that has the capability of phasing out of our dimension, and it somehow attaches itself to people and tries to remote control them, according to these texts. And then another one which looks like a description of a gray alien, which has also that kind of a weird capability, but that both of these beings are actually archons that suck the life out of people through their emotions, that they generate fear and distrust and anger and envy and war. And in some weird way, multidimensionally, they're able to eat that energy, that low frequency. And so that's talked about in the Nag Hammadi. But the Anunnaki themselves, I believe that they were flesh and blood people. Great question there.
What about Nibiru? Is the brown dwarf Nibiru? Does Nibiru rotate around that brown dwarf? And is Nibiru still in existence?
Yeah, see, so that's where a lot of the confusion comes. A lot of the people who have been looking for this Nibiru think it's a single rogue planet. But now, due to all the research I've put in, I believe that it's a planet that orbits a brown dwarf star, which would account for some of the descriptions of Nibiru in some of the ancient texts, as well as the Enuma Elish and the Seven Tablets of Creation, and also the Epic of Atrahasis, or the Atrahasis Epic. Those two predate Zecharia Sitchin's work by hundreds of years, and they've been translated for hundreds of years, long before Zecharia Sitchin was even born. But the underlying story is the same with everybody. Beings came here from another planet, or maybe another star system. They began to strip mine this planet for resources, as well as Mars. At some point, they engaged in genetic modification of an existing hominid on this planet. They didn't create human beings from scratch. They genetically modified the beings that were on our cousins before we became Homo sapiens, whatever we were. They genetically modified, probably making us a lot more dumbed down, because that's where you get the junk DNA.
Oh, interesting.
We've been disconnected. Our brains were bigger. Our cousins' brains were much bigger than our brains right now, which means they were probably much smarter. The pineal glands were probably bigger as well.
So the story of us being a primitive human and then genetically altered to be a half god Anunnaki, half primitive, may not be correct, and we may have been actually more sentient and more conscious, and then it actually went the other way around.
Absolutely. I truly believe that we were much smarter, much more intelligent, and much more advanced. Not technologically advanced, more spiritually advanced, more in tune with the planet, the Earth, the frequency, the Schumann resonance of the Earth. Our billions of magnetite crystals on our brains were probably being used. We were able to probably navigate the planet, communicate silently, and everything else. May have even had other gifts, but I think that was all disconnected when they turned us into slaves and put a gene in, which has been scientifically discovered now, a gene put into us for worship, as well as chromosome number 2 being taken out and fused together, and 2 telomere caps being put on each end to shorten our lifespans. I think that we are in a situation where the Anunnaki arrived here, or this Atlantean culture arrived here at the time that we fell. I believe that our former human cousins were here and had risen and fallen 4 times, just like the Mayans said, to high levels of civilization on our own. And I believe that the Anunnaki arrived on this planet at a time where we had already fallen again in terms of technology, for whatever reason, whether it was war, whether it was a geological disaster.
Perfect infiltration.
Right. They arrived at a perfect time in our history, and they were able to masquerade as gods and utilize that against us.
And what is the timeline we're looking at?
450,000 years ago, they arrived here. They then mined this planet and worked and lived on this planet along with us and along with other humanoids that were already here, including the Ubaid culture, which was more reptilian. They found those statuettes already in Iraq. And then around 200,000 years into it is when they began infighting, and some of the working class Ijiji Anunnaki began to want to have a coup against the rulers And that's when the decision was made to genetically modify an existing hominid. They could have begun with AI technology, kind of alludes to that type of wording, but they knew that that could be dangerous for them as competitors because they had a few of them already working in the medical labs, but I feel that they thought that maybe AI, as we now are finding out, could be extremely dangerous if you turn Skynet on. At some point, they could realize that human beings are not even needed anymore. So they decided to create a worker slave that they can manipulate and they can use, and that's unfortunately us. The Ijiji are the working class Anunnaki. Now, they weren't slaves, but they were kind of treated as slaves. Most of them were sent to Mars to work on Mars, and they were complaining about the atmosphere. They were complaining about conditions there. Mars was already kind of a scarred planet. It was and still even is now a livable planet. It used to be a moon. It was a moon of Tiamat before Tiamat exploded and turned into the asteroid belt. Now these Ijiji, they are the ones spoken about in the Old Testament that basically fell to earth. Is when they came to earth and they took women as their wives. They had no women, they had nothing. They were just working with no women, no vacations, no breaks, and the workload was getting heavier and heavier, and the conditions were getting worse and worse. And that's when they decided, we had enough. And so this was a class of people, more like a working class of people that I don't know if they volunteered to come along with the Pantheon, or if they were forced to come, but at some point they got fed up with everything.
Were they the same race as the Anunnaki or a different kind of demigod like Zeus compared to Hercules?
I believe that they were a different race. And when you start looking into these tablets, you start to realize that these Anunnaki might have been a multiracial group of beings, not just all from this Nibiru place.
Multiple extraterrestrial races?
Right, multiple extraterrestrial races. There's even one passage that kind of alludes to one of the Anunnaki marrying somebody from another planet. So you start to look into this and you start going, wow, this may have been a multicultural race of people. Yeah. And when you look at the Emerald Tablets, which I wrote about, where Thoth is sent here by his dad, or sent to the land of Kem by his dad, to raise them back to a high level of civilization because of the flood just happened, all of a sudden he's talking about his crew spreading out all over the planet and actually duplicating what they did in the land of Kem. And then all of a sudden you start to see these megalithic structures and these pyramids all over the world. So they became a global civilization again. But what's interesting is you have people all over the world in these areas that then possibly took on the genetic marker of their new ruler or king who started that civilization, which hence could be the reason for having different races on this